to continue with a great panel. And in this panel, we are going to answer many of the questions that were posed by the previous panel on how do we govern the brain commons. And basically, the easy answer many times is let's create a specific regulation for this specific new technology. And in recent years, we have seen how this is always a trap. It opens a door for lobby. It really meets civil society overwhelmed with different priorities, having to become experts in a very complex topic. And it many times leaves a big gap in time, or while the institutions that are supposed to enforce the new regulation come in place. So we at the Open Knowledge Foundation not only believe in using the tools that we already have available, and by tools I mean not exclusively legislation, regulation, but also other ways to regulate some technologies that are not necessarily laws, including standards, including architecture choices, including community oversight, including an engaged public that understands very well the issue and pushes back, and public opinion. So this panel will be about that, about exploring how we govern the brain commons and how openness could play a role in governing these new technologies. And we are going to address this from different perspectives. We are going to first, I know that Professor Reinhold Scherer is in the middle of a commitment, so we will start with him. Professor, welcome to all the panelists, but Professor Reinhold Scherer is the Vice President of the BCI Society, and it's fascinating because it's the last aspect that I was addressing of how communities, interconnected communities with all the relevant actors can play an incredible role in keeping these technologies accountable and governed. He's a professor of brain-computer interfaces and neural engineering at the University of Essex, and he's head of the School of Computer Science and Electronic Engineering as well. He has been more than 20 years focused on computational and system-level methods for decoding, modeling, and interacting with neural processes, but also he has been active in this community aspect on BCIs. I came across to your work, Professor Scherer, when I started exploring the field, and I was amazed by the caring space that you have created with the BCI Society. It was very interesting to me to see, it was a first time I would say that I would see a space where every stakeholder that has something to say about the technology has a place to be. But you are, of course, the expert, so the floor is yours to explain us a little bit more about your work and your views on how can we govern these technologies in a way that is open and participatory and effective. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Fine. Perfect. Yeah, so thank you very much. And yeah, I'm celebrating my son graduates today, so I just sneak in and then out again. But I think it's a really good opportunity to engage in this conversation because it's really, really important. So I will not have slides. I understand. I just give a short statement. I don't know, 5-10 minutes, depending how much I forget. And then I guess we move on. But yeah, first, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending, or good evening, depending where you join this event. And again, in the spirit of openness, before I begin, you already mentioned it, I'm the Vice President of the BCI Society. I'm affiliated with the University of Essex, but I'm also a member affiliated with the Center of Neurotechnology as well. And all the views I share today, they are mine, not necessarily representing those organizations. But you mentioned my experience, and as a researcher, I think in neural engineering, I have spent much of my time working on data. I just joined a few minutes. I listened in a few minutes in the previous panel discussion where he talked about data and signal processing, and this is what I did most of my career, evaluating signals and exploring really how machines and how humans and machines interact more effectively. And one thing I've learned is then, of course, there's a really big difference between what we do in the lab space and what happens when we move into the real world or into society in a kind of responsible way. I think this is the really important part with this kind of technology. Just give the listeners some ideas. So in the lab, typically we ask questions like, can we measure something more accurately? Can we improve a specific algorithm? Can we improve the performance? Or in general, can we build a better system? Now, whatever better means, but this is something which is a very hopefully easy to understand language. But then when the technology leaves the laboratory and enters in the real world, then completely different questions emerges, So who checks whether the claims are valid? You discussed this before, or who decides what's enough evidence, Or do the user at the end really understand what's going on, what's really happening? Another important part is, can decisions be challenged? And then also, how do we ensure that the benefits at the end and the risks so that the benefits are shared, but the risks they are also managed. And these are not technical questions, but they are questions about, I guess, trust, accountability, public oversight, and therefore I think again this conversation, hopefully we will have it now, is really, really important to raise this awareness. Because as the panel previously was discussing, non-invasive technologies, they already move beyond the research labs and they move into specialist clinics or environments. And we can see more and more of these technologies out there claiming they assess attention, fatigue, stress, engagement, cognitive performance, well-being, you name it, there will be probably a product on the market who claims that this is possible. And some of these applications, however, there's a distinction. Some are aimed at healthcare, some at education, some at workplaces, and some are simply for performance improvement or for well-being. Again, just to give the listener or the audience a kind of a better picture, is I would like to share a few imaginations or situations. Let's imagine a school who introduces a headset that claims to measure the students' attention during the lessons, or a factory who uses new technology to monitor fatigue and reduce accidents, or brain monitoring tools to improve employee productivity, or a wellness platform who promises to optimize focus, stress management, and mental performance. And of course, these examples are no longer science fiction. And they, however, they raise immediate important questions. How reliable are the measurements really? Who validates the claims? And what happens when decisions are made based on these outputs? And at the end, who's accountable for these decisions, especially if they are wrong? And so a lot of conversations I was involved in the past focus on privacy, and privacy is extremely important. But privacy alone, I think, is not enough, especially as an engineer, where I recently find myself asking completely different questions. Who controls the system that interprets the brain data is a much more interesting question, if you ask me. Because the real power, the data has a lot of value, but power lies in the interpretation of the data, in the algorithms, in the models, and at the end in the platform who transforms the signals into predictions, and then the predictions into decision. And this is for me the core questions where openness can help. And again, as an example, we can imagine two different futures. In the first future, everyone owns their own brain data, so all transparent. And in the second, let's imagine a small number of organizations control the algorithms that interpret the data and determine what it means. And of course, you can imagine which of those futures contains greater concentrations of power. And this is what we need to avoid or prevent. And so for me, therefore, this is why we should not only think about the data, but also about, I think, what is called the cognitive infrastructure. If I'm not mistaken, at least that's my interpretation of this cognitive infrastructure, which is the system who interprets or who determines at the end, how the brain signals are interpreted, how claims are validated, how the technologies interact, who can inspect them, who can challenge them, and at the end, who really benefits from them. And this brings us to this topic of openness, because openness is not just an ideology, it's really a practical mechanism for accountability, because openness enables us enables scrutiny, enables trust at the end, competition, but also innovation. And this again does not mean everything must be open or should be open. Personal data, of course, should be protected. Patients should be protected. Users in general should be protected. But many other things, they should be open to scrutiny, like standards should be open. Validation methods should be open and transparent. The scientific evidence should be accessible. Performance claims should be able to be verified independently. And so should not just depend on the promises, but just trust should depend on the ability to inspect, test, and question and verify. So we'll be able to replicate, reproduce what others are claiming. And so also this, I think it's important to understand this is not just about legislation, because it's really about governance. And because standards are governance, if you think about it, procurement is governance, because it depends who buys what. Consumer protection is governance. Professional communities are governance. So we mentioned before, BCI society is playing a role, of course, and other societies in this are tries to play a role. Scientific peer review is governance. And then, of course, open science is governance, and public participation is governance. So all of this can happen before we even go before they are being formally regulated. And I think this is the standard for, in fact, many technologies, most of all of the technologies so far. And so, therefore, the good thing about this is that many of these factors already exist, or the mechanisms already exist, because we have professional communities, we have standard organization, we have consumer protection authorities, we have research ethics processes, and we have procurement frameworks. So many of these things are already available. We just need to tap into them. And of course, this is the challenge: how we use these existing tools in a way and so wisely and also practically to help us make sure what should remain open also stays open. And this is really important because if we look at some of the mistakes we as a society have made with digital technologies in the past, where the question about accountability often has arisen way too late, when the systems had already become deeply embedded in society, and then it's quite very difficult to come in with legislation and change things. So we need to be really preemptive in this case. And so I would like to leave you with one question. Again, as neurotechnology becomes more common in schools, in workplaces, healthcare, everyday life, what are the foundations that must remain open in these technologies to remain accountable for society? Because ultimately, I think the challenge for us is not simply to protect the data, this is part of it, but it's really about ensuring that the systems who interpret the data remain transparent, contestable, and accountable. And if we achieve this, then your technology can really strengthen human agency and the human potential. If we are not as successful or we fail in doing this, then we find ourselves probably dependent on the systems, which are, on one hand, too important to questions, but at the same time too opaque to trust, and then we are in a really situation which we don't want to find us once again by adopting technology without thinking things through. So thank you. This was just my quick statement. Let's say no slide, sorry, there was no time, but I hope it shares a little bit the ideas or my thinking behind it, and addresses also some of the issues which I think are very important.
Thank you, Professor. It was excellent. It really provided us with this initial overview to see from the many places where governance comes. And it reminded me, like when we were trying in the early days of, algorithms to try to open the black boxes, and how civil society struggled, and it was like, okay, transparency, and openness. And to tell the truth, the ability to understand by authorities was extremely limited, and the resources as well. So even with provisions, mandating it, it was not feasible to go at the speed of deployment. And we have seen, I mean, I'm not saying anything new, so in this field, given the importance of this topic, maybe we are already a bit late, but what we are trying to do here is to elevate the alert and point at the tools that we can activate right now, and this can only be done with this shared knowledge from the experts, from us in this panel, that are really saving us, many years that we will have to go alone trying to understand this, fast tracking basically what we are trying to achieve at the foundation. I want to then pass the floor to, because you mentioned standards, and we have the perfect person to talk about standards here, among other things, to Dr. Laura Cabrera. I was very happy to read your biography, because I think that you were born in Mexico and Guatemala, so it's next door. Dr. Laura Cabrera is a advisory board member at IEEE Brain and IEEE TechEthics, and she is currently the Dorothy Third Huck and J. Lloyd Huck Chair in Neuroethics at Penn State. And among many, many, many achievements, she has been exploring this topic deeply. And she's also chairing the P7700, the recommended practice for the responsible design and development of neurotechnologies, which is mostly what we are talking here. So Dr. Laura, the floor, I don't know if you're still here with us, but the floor is, we cannot see you because the camera is closed. Lucas will transfer the ability to present, and the floor is yours. Unless you want us to share the presentation.
This is new to me. Okay, I am trying to figure out how to share within this platform. So I understand.
You have icons. You have a happy face, a microphone, a camera, and then a little screen. You have to click on the little screen, and that will enable you to share.
I have to have a tab open with my presentation?
Yes.
Oh, wait. That, I thought that, okay, so my apologies. I thought when you say share your screen, that's what I did, and I thought to have them with this. I don't know that this is going to work, but let me see. I don't have my slides in
sorry for jumping in and just here again. I can share your screen for you, Laura, the presentation for you, if you email
Yeah, that'd be
us.
great, because I don't have them in a browser tab, so I have them in PowerPoint.
Yeah, please just email it or point us with a link or something.
I can pass it to you.
Yeah, okay.
Or can I share from it? No, that's a different one. Tech issues are always a thing, right? All right, but let me see. Maybe I can start when my slides get up there. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Certainly, this is a space that I've been thinking a lot from different projects, and some of them involve not only collection of one modality of brain data, but really multimodal data, which I think it also raises a variety of considerations to the discussions that we've already been having so far. As it was mentioned, I have a variety of different hats in terms of my roles in IEEE standards, IEEE Brain, IEEE TechEthics, also with the International Neuroethics Society, and a member also of the International Brain Initiative. So when we think about governance, and part of it has been openness, right? We want it to be inclusive, participatory, transparent, accountable, as it's mentioned, responsive, consensus-oriented, so that different stakeholders can have an input and share their concerns and perspectives. So I think all of those are key parts. Can you go next? Another one, please. So next, I'm ready. Next one, please. I'm here. Yeah, thank you. So I think Dr. Reinhold already mentioned a couple of these really key questions when we think about responsible openness, right? Sharing data. I mean, who should control the data? Who should have access to the data? Who should benefit from access to the data, right? And I think this conversation is key because we're not just talking about the focus on the data, but on the power structures that surround data, right? So those decisions in terms of, well, I'm now creating this new model, and companies are going to become rich, but everyone that provides that data is not going to, right? So I think that's not the type of future we want, and that's why these conversations are key. Next. Thank you. So I think was also mentioned that we're really moving beyond research and medical-oriented applications, really consumer space, right? And I know that for the focus of today, to focus on non-implantable BCIs. And I think that the reason for this is because these are more open and available for a variety of people in the world. In the examples that were mentioned in the previous remarks were excellent, right? In the school, in the workplace, for wellness. One of the projects I'm involved, they're looking at, understand the brain of artists in movement, in dance, in music. So the potential is, it's amazing in terms of what we can learn about brain and behavior. But I think we also need to stop down and think about the type of socio-technical systems that we are embedded, right? Where do we have these technologies? In a perfect society, I would embrace openness without hesitation. But seeing the world that we currently are, the type of governments that are in place, the power structures that, whether we like it or not, are shifting, who gets to make these decisions, we need to think carefully. And also think this is an opportunity to empower the rest of society to really pay attention to these conversations, to push back. So this is kind of, I think, a key aspect of this conversation. Next. So the movement in terms of what can we do, what are the different mechanisms that we currently have, right? So yes, we have legislation, we have clinical consumer regulation from the internationally and at local levels. We also have standards, so IEEE standards. I am the chair of one of the first socio-technical standards for neurotechnology. So there's a variety of technical standards that are looking at, other components of what it counts as a BCI, but I'm really focused, the group is really focused on how we move from ethical principles to implementation so that we can develop responsible neurotechnology. And as Reinhold mentioned, these are open to everyone who wants to use, and they can reach out to us and they can become part of the working group. And really welcome that we've been trying to gather from participants from around the world, from Egypt, from Europe, from Japan. But I would love to give more broader conversation in this type of activities.
Dr. Cabrera, sorry to interrupt you. You're cutting off a little bit, so which might be a problem of connectivity. So maybe just for the talk, you turn off the camera and just indicate the slides. I'm sorry about that.
No, but I am traveling, so I can see that the hotel where I'm staying is not perfect connection. So thank you for bearing with me. So we have ethical guidelines for a variety of groups, IEEE Brain, UNESCO, and some principles. So I think the key aspect is how do we tap into all of these elements that we currently have? How do we complement them, right? I think just one is not going to be enough, or how do we really nest all of these type of tools that we have available in the governance landscape and move forward. Next slide, please. Clearly, there's this inherent tension about we want to be more open. We want to share and reuse data, but we also want to protect data from misuses. So that's a tension that is not going, but how can we, do the best with this existing tension? Next slide. So I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say that there's a variety of opportunities that come with openness, for mobilize public health responses, prevent data waste, support the learning healthcare system, improve statistical power and sample sizes. So again, these have been documented in several papers, in several conversations. So we know that there are key opportunities for society and individuals in terms of having an open infrastructure. Next, please. But openness can also support, transparency, competition, competitiveness. So we need, again, there's a variety of opportunities here. Now, the question for everyone is like, are these benefits enough, right? Do they outweigh any potential risk that might come from that openness? And again, when I ask this question, I am thinking on socio-technical systems where we currently living in. Next. So, for example, it was mentioned, some of the examples that were mentioned by Dr. Reinhold in terms of, well, we're using this in schools, right? So maybe this data can help individuals to, better know about their learning patterns and be able to adapt according to that. But this same data shared openly, can be used to profile people, can be used for, health insurance to maybe charge higher premiums to individuals. Again, it's just, we need to get really smart about what could be the potential uses and misuses that this data collectively can have. Next. So I think based on the previous conversation in the earlier remarks and previous presentation, I think there's some understanding that perhaps we don't want everything to be open. Maybe not all type of brain data should be open. Maybe in the case of multimodal data, maybe we don't want all type of link data to be put out there open because re-identification can be easier. Maybe we want to think about, do we want data to be open just with scientific purposes? We also want it to be open for commercial purposes. And then who should be involved in the decisions? Next. So we need to consider that, we want affordable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data is all good, but it also requires context for it to be useful. And that openness without provenance and relevant population context and access conditions, such as consent, for example, can become irresponsible. So again, a variety of tensions there in terms of, yes, openness is good, but we also need to account for all of these other aspects. Next. So some of the barriers, there are clearly ethical considerations, and privacy is one, and misuses of the data, so another one. We also have the commercial value of data, right? We have powerful stakeholders that do not want the data or the models, the infrastructures to be open because, that's where the value that they gain, right? And I'm surprised that I've also in my own research encountered a variety of cultural barriers, right? Even though when the scientific community is about openness, at the same time, their particular views as openness is interesting, because sometimes they would say, I want the data to be open until I publish my manuscript, or, until I post so things like this. So I think it's interesting to also understand some of these cultural barriers and assumptions are underlying the openness movement. Next. So here's also where I found that there's different concepts of definition of core concepts, different understandings. So what is, the distinction between open and public, and how different regulations and practices that currently exist are interpreted. Next, please, to the next slide. It's I have an animation, but you can just go to the next one, please. There's also gaps in current ethical review frameworks. So I know for colleagues in Europe, GDPR, in the US, certainly a big move for broad consent. But within those frameworks is an assumption that the data is observed, disclosed, and bounded, but that's not the reality of data out there. I think, again, how can we improve our current ethical review frameworks to protect data? Next. The challenge is, compliance with FAIR principles is essential, but there are inherent tensions also with CARE principles. And it's really interesting that infrastructure to ensure responsible governance is there, but often conflicts with other needs or priorities that society might have, that research people might have. So I think, more conversation needs to happen around this. Next. This, I think, I'm gonna end up here with openness in a responsible manner. So you click and next for the rest of the content to come up. So obviously we've been talking about governance, but we need to move into stewardship. We need to think about this from a life cycle perspective, from how we design, how we're gonna collect data, how we collect the data, how we share the data, how we, the end of the data use. I think data minimization is something that has been proposed in different platforms and frameworks. But again, what are the trade-offs of that, right? Data minimization also means that we cannot take full advantage of the benefits of the data. So this is important, but how do we deal with the trade-off? User-friendly privacy policies. If we're talking about the consumer space, this is key, right? Anyone that has a device or just a tech device, it's really hard to understand some of their policies that they have in terms of how their data is going to be used, how they're going to share with other third parties and things like that. We need to develop benefit sharing models and to have user access to documents, platforms on how companies, given that we're talking about BCI companies, share and use their data, right? I think here's where openness can really enhance accountability as well. So I think I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabrera. I have a quick question, just follow-up question on all the landscape that you presented. How are the bodies reacting, all these regulatory bodies and all these groups of experts reacting to the, I would call it like, low level or just more junk wearables that claim to be brain-computer interface? Like we have in our research, we found the market, like now you can find many devices that claim the ability to read the brains, to guide the brains, and so on, and they seem to be everywhere. And we were also following the investment in these wearables, these new wearables, and how it has increased. So is it any, what's your opinion on it? Do you think that it will peak? Do you think there will be like a new, a new real problem of many people wearing them? And what do you think that what is the business behind these kind of devices? Do you think that is a potential risk in these devices just being, like a front for a back end business of data brokers, brain data brokers, to be used for other purposes? I'm sorry, like just the reaction at the increased amount of devices that claim brain computer interface capabilities and these new neurotech wearables, and how in your field, how is there any worry, or it is just not it's a non-problem at the moment?
I think we're right there, right? I think it just has become very public, or to an extent that it has become too problematic. But within the current neurotech wearable, there was this report by the Neuro Rights Foundation where they look at how the companies report or account for how they share their data, who they share the data, what they use data, and very already the landscape was in terms of there's really much accountability out there. So there's a vision that as people start taking this is what is unclear because it has there's a people are scared, which I think rightly so, or because they're catching up with why they should be doing this. But I think the wearable space is huge. There's a lot of investment. So I certainly that the uptake in consumer tech is going to grow, and I think this is a moment where we as a society need to become more, with our professional community, members of the public, really push back in terms of what these companies are allowed to do. And I think beyond neurotech space, just wearables more broadly, because one of the benefits that I could see companies are going to do is to link different data types, right, from different public. So I think it's not just going to be about brain data, it's going to be about personal data. And I think we need to be thinking about that in terms to really protect the person as a whole.
Thank you so much, and we will go back to you in the round of discussion with the panel. But last, we have Dr. Iness Guirat. She's postdoctoral researcher at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, and she has been working a lot in the how to design technologies that are like rights preserving and or rights expanding for a long time. Iness will share with us her perspectives. One of her most quoted papers that I recommend you to write is Resistant Technologies, Moving Beyond Alternative Designs. And part of those views, among others, will be shared today in this presentation on how to govern the brain commons. Thank you, Iness. The floor is yours. Do you want us to share the presentation? Do you want to share it yourself?
I think that could be nice. Okay, I can see it there. Yeah, thank you so much. It's only a few slides. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay, so this has been like really great intro, and I think my part of this presentation, which I was expecting it to be, but this is I think this is a good fit, is I will be taking a step back and talk about privacy by design. And I'm from the engineering background. I did my PhD on privacy enhancing technology, but again using mathematical models and how to analyze and evaluate different privacy enhancing technologies. And right now I'm trying to look at more socio-technical system of privacy within the context of smart cities, and my project is funded by FNRS. So the reason I'm talking about privacy by design is because there is a lot of literature since 2010, 2013 on this topic, but it's kind of now is people don't talk about it, or they assume that oh, privacy by design is just something we can do. And the two presentations before me, they were saying basically yes, we need to talk about the life cycle, we need to talk about existent design. And from the engineering perspective, I can see also I'm an engineer. I can see how I can be confused about what does privacy by design mean. And I also teach engineers, so I also see that it's very confusing. So I'm going to go through, if we can go to the second slide. Yeah, so what is privacy? Privacy is also even more confusing term, especially from the technical perspective. And it's often mentioned as privacy is a human right, or privacy is an aspect of security, and privacy about secrecy or about control. So it's always privacy is something else, right? But technically, we don't really have a formal definition, not even mathematical one, but a precise definition of a privacy. We do have for security as engineers. Every engineer would know what does security mean. It's formalized with different properties. But when it comes to privacy, we don't really have a definition for it. So my point is when you imagine when we're asking engineers to build privacy enhanced system, and they don't even know what is the definition of privacy, of course, we're going to lead into systems that they are not even private. And it's even more confusing when we talk about privacy by design, because it's even an issue that is misunderstood from if you talk to legal people, they would say one thing. If you talk to technical people, they would say other things. And so maybe we can I go to the next slide? Yeah. So when you talk to legal people, it's often like the privacy by design is from a legal approach, is like we're talking about openness, of course, we're talking about that, of course, there will be some form of acknowledgement that personal data will be disclosed. After all, we're talking about digital systems. So of course, data will be kind of like moving around. And this is why one of the things that I really don't, I think it deserves a lot of like discussion anyway in panels like this, is when we talk a lot about data minimization, right? So data minimization is understood from the legal perspective as like, okay, let's minimize data. When we talk to engineers, is like, what does it even mean? Okay, sure, there is a trade-off, because everything in any digital system, it's about data. It's like turning on your computer is also an information. It's also the fact that like we use certain system at certain time to communicate with certain people. All of that is like data. So when we are designing the privacy enhanced system, what does it mean when to say like data minimization? Because the extreme of it is like, let's not use like the digital system at all, right? But then like from the legal perspective, of course, they don't mean that, but they mean, okay, we need to like evaluate the trade-off. We need to have also more entities that they will govern this data, right? It's like slightly small amount of data, because we need to apply the data minimization principle, but then also we need to have on developing mechanism that keep these entities and these data process in check, right? But the assumption under it is, the assumption is saying like privacy by design is a legal approach to systems design, is we have entities that are trusted, but when they are not trusted, we have other entities that put them in check, right? And that's kind of what GDPR is doing. Okay, we're going to assume that companies, because we know the law, that they are not going to abuse the data, that they're not going to violate the data, the privacy, they're not going to collect more data than they should. But if they do, which happened in Facebook, for example, in the multiple cases and multiple other companies as well, we also have other entities, like for example, like CNIL in France, or like any other European member state, that will make sure that they keep these entities in check in order to prevent data abuse, right? So that's kind of like what privacy by design from the legal approach is saying. Then like it came, can we go to the next slide? Then like more technical people, more researchers or engineers, they were saying, okay, but like the legal thing is not enough for us, because we are not okay with these assumptions. And like, of course, we've seen a lot of violation from especially the big data, the big companies, the big Silicon Valley's companies, that they are abusing of this data and they don't protect the laws. And like for them, it's like, okay, well, let's pay these fines, and like we don't care. So then like it came more like privacy by design, but like more like from a confidentiality paradigm. And privacy by design in that sense, it means like we need to minimize not the data, but we need to minimize the trust. What does it mean is like when we build system, it's not the data that we need to focus on. Of course, data will be minimized. That's not the point. But what we need to minimize really is like we need to minimize a single point of failure or a single point that collects all the data, right? So, for example, we don't have like single server that collects all the data, and we're saying like, okay, but we're going to minimize the data, because at the end, this server will have data. Again, turning on our computer or using a specific app, or like in the case of brains, that's already a data. But we're saying is like we cannot have, from a technical perspective, we cannot have one single server, for example, that collects all the data. So it's more like privacy by design from a confidentiality perspective. It's not really about data minimization. It's more about like trust minimization. So we cannot have entities that have a lot of data or a lot of control, where the functionality and like the legal and all the aspect of any privacy enhancing technology rely on the center function. And it's not necessarily also an infrastructure. It's not it's like about the server. It's also even about the function, right? That can be using. And this is why a lot of engineers or a lot of researchers, they talk about avoiding the function creep, which is we cannot have, when we are designing system, we cannot have a function that for now it only collects a specific data, but in the future it can also be used to collect more data, right? So because that will necessarily lead to collecting more data. So again, the data minimization principle is as good as it sounds, but in reality, when it comes to building systems, it doesn't serve a lot of engineers a lot of use. So it's more about the minimization of trust. And then a lot of researchers that come from this like world of like a confidentiality paradigm, they talk about the increase of the trust. It's not on entities, but on the privacy solution itself. So for example, if I use like anonymous credential, I am trusting the technology. I'm not trusting the server, or I'm not trusting if I go to like a parking lot, for example, where I put like my car, I'm not trusting the parking lot to like not reveal what time do I go to this parking lot, but I should be trusting the technology that gives me certain credit, for example, or certain hours that will give me that access to that parking lot in like a privacy enhanced way. So, and how do we trust the technology? We trust the technology because we emphasize the openness, we emphasize the open source traditions of programming. We emphasize also the code being read and discussed and the open science principle. And that's kind of what leads to increasing the trust in the privacy solution itself. And maybe I'll go to I think it's the final slide. Yeah. And of course, in reality, and like this is kind of like privacy by design is like, again, like not a lot of people, and that's what I was trying to make it in this panel, is like it has been talked a lot, and then like it kind of stopped. And then now we're seeing like all these like new technology and these AIs, and like people start like referencing privacy by design a lot. But in my understanding, or at least like in the majority of spaces, there is often like this confusion of what does privacy by design mean? But privacy by design is neither that or that, right? Like it's not just like a legal approach, but it also cannot really but like a pure technological perspective, technological hardcore minimization of trust, because then like we kind of like reduce, and we've seen like a lot of technology that like have like a lot of privacy sophisticated features, like, I don't know, like homomorphic encryption or like anonymous credentials and like this and that, then they end up not being used a lot, especially for the masses. So what kind of like our experiences, at least like as a researcher who's been working in the field for the last 10 years, is we've seen like the good privacy by design system that kind of have like a bit of both, a bit of like legal framework. It's very important that we emphasize the openness, because technical privacy measures alone cannot just like solve all the problems. That all the problems, they're not just caused by the technical aspect, they're also caused by the business models, the power imbalance, the surveillance practices, the legal frameworks of different countries, how people use all different technology. So it's not just like a pure technical perspective, but it's also it's not just a pure legal framework, because then we're ending up creating a lot of opening a lot of doors for like privacy violation. And I really highly recommend this book by Professor Yap Heng, who kind of like explained like the different principles of a life cycle, which is like Laura has been talking about, of like what is the life cycle, what is like the system design when we're talking about like, for example, privacy. And it's really not just, we can see like the life cycle of like different steps, and like privacy is not just like a button that we plug here and there, but it's more like we need to have it in the entire life cycle. And while respecting these like different principles, I'm not going to go into details in explaining all of these, but you can kind of see like from the beginning, it's like a little bit of technical, minimizing the trust, separating the processes, abstracting as much information as possible. But we also see a lot of legal framework approaches, which is about the control, which is about enforcement, which is about open source, etc. And yeah, I just wanted to finish this with saying that this kind of reminder about privacy by design and how can we apply it for the brains.
Thank you, Iness. I have just a follow-up question before we enter the collective conversation, which will be very brief. I wanted to ask you from your experience, because we know, like, you know, how strict the privacy enforcement is to some extent in Europe and in other jurisdictions, mostly OECD countries. Outside that, when, you know, like, you know, most of these technologies will come from very few jurisdictions and will be deployed globally. And we have seen with other technologies that when they are deployed globally in large environments, the differences on terms of use and the limits and the safeguards, they are erased quickly. What will be, like, you know, your greatest fear with these technologies, and where do you see like that? Where should be, like, you know, our focus on this at the production at the point where they produce the goods. So, because we have seen with surveillance technologies that we are trying to reverse and try to tackle the problem by suing the companies in Italy and in Israel and so on. For you, in this new wave of technologies, not to repeat mistakes that we did with other technologies, where should we focus the effort on governance so as to prevent further damage in the global south?
I think, thank you, Renata. But this is a very good point, because what we see in Europe is often is okay, looking at privacy by design is that's what I was trying to do in the talk, is but from a purely legal perspective, right? So we're going to assume that data is going to be collected. We're going to assume that we have a decentralized infrastructure. We're going to assume that these entities will respect the data. But just in case, we do have in Europe good infrastructure that they punish these services, right? But which is you said in the global south, that doesn't translate very well. I think what we can really do in the next future in order not to avoid the mistake, privacy, we know it's not just a technical aspect as a definition. It's not either a legal aspect either. It's a socio-technical system that we need to build from the beginning. And like Laura or Reinhold said, is we need to include it from the beginning in the life cycle of any software, any system that we build, so that we don't look back in 10 years and say okay, now we're just going to try to punish these bad people, but we can't punish these bad people, so oh well. So if it's from the beginning, it's we have the legal, the governance, the technical, building the system, I think there will be, of course, less chance to look back and say, okay, we're regretting these decisions.
Thank you. I just want to go back to everybody with just one question to close the panel. And it is on focus, what would be the point, and I think that Dr. Scherer already mentioned it, but I would love him to expand it. What would be the main point where the efforts of openness should be focused at? Is it the data? Is it the hardware? Is it the data pipeline? Is it the user, the regulation? Where should we, the main point where we should focus our, efforts? That will be many to guarantee that there's no lock-in both in the possibilities of these technologies to be not to be concentrated in few actors, but also the possibilities of accountability.
Okay, I need to. So I guess the question is for me. So I'll start to elaborate a little bit more on this. But I think at the end, based on my experience, the technological capabilities and the societal readiness very often kind of evolve at different speeds. And I think this is where we need to. Or this could be the biggest thing when we are able to explain society and the people about the methods, what the systems really can do, what they cannot do, and we get their support, we get the trust. This is, I think, the biggest win if everyone is basically educated in this, because then we don't have to. Then the majority, at least, if you all play to the rule, and of course buy-in is important, but in this case, if we then all play by the rules, then really this technology can be used, to support, to do what's supposed to be doing, but also to support moving society forward. So I think for me, the biggest part is really having training people to understand what we really mean, or us as researchers being able to explain it really clearly. And someone mentioned, I think, I can't remember, it was Iness, about the language, or we don't even have the same vocabulary to understand each other, because I think BCI in general, or neurotechnology, is such an interdisciplinary field that everyone comes in with a different model and interpretation of the world. And then you engage in a conversation, and when you leave the conversation, at least this happened to me very often, and I'm guilty of this myself. Everyone takes a different message home, and this is quite very challenging. Yet what we need to do, we need to agree on this shared message. And then if we then understand the risks, but also the potential of this, then we really can make big improvement or big impact, because this is openness. No? If people understand what they're talking about and what the real risks are, not what people tell you what the risks are, I think this is what we can tackle. How? Well, that's a different question. But I think just starting the conversation and really having honest conversations. No? Because you mentioned before, there are devices, you can do everything at the moment, and there's no law preventing them to doing it. It's just economic success will define whether a tool is helpful or not. And sometimes, this was, I think, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, there was a BCI system, the Star Wars trainer, they sold millions of devices. It was just a game where you can basically control with your force the ball, or you just close your eyes and then the ball also moves. So it's really, yeah, I think education, having really a good conversation with the general public about this technology, because this technology really goes to the core of who we are. It has a special place. I've never seen people getting so either frustrated or so scared by saying, okay, we tap into the brain, which is explainable, but at the same time, it's just data. But it's still different. Anyway, I digress. But I think that for me, the best way forward is really engage openly and be just honest with the public about what's possible and what's not possible. And at the moment, that's not always happening.
Thank you. I will go now to Dr. Cabrera, who has her hand raised.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with Dr. Scherer on education and engagement. Certainly, very important pillars to how to tackle this. But I would add to really focus on the power infrastructures that we currently have, right? Because they determine who uses the data, how they use it, who benefits. So this is not an easy, thing to do, but that's the only way in which openness can really benefit humanity as a whole, not just a few.
Thank you, Doctor. And as a follow-up question, because one of the limitations that on our research we faced was to see, institutions of the past, the way that a patent is filed, for example, and the discovery process of a patent, trade secrets, and how. We have two realities. One reality is the reality of the lab, where medical BCIs are being, created, that is super strict, highly regulated, with intense scrutiny for medical purposes and so on. And on the other side, we have this regulation circumvention that we have identified of other companies that are experimenting a lot, trying to evade the medical regulations, basically, and at the same time super protected and almost unscrutinable because of the trade secrets and other company protections. And we also went look into the patents that have been granted on these technologies, that to very few actors, to go to your point of power concentration, and the claims seem very low to me. And in some ways, the claims that what is being protected around these technologies is another point of enclosure that will, impede people to play with the technology and develop, a more public interest technologies around all of this. So I would love your opinion on that, on those tensions.
Is the question for someone specific or?
Yes, for Dr. Cabrera as a follow-up, but anyone can answer if you want to answer, because I don't know if she's still around or she heard the question. Yes.
Yeah, maybe in the meantime, but she can.
because it was very blurry, so I missed one part.
I am sorry, just the tensions with what many of the blockers that we have for accountability are, legacies from the past, I guess, of infrastructures, of very protectionist infrastructures, such as, all trade secret regime, how patents are granted in these fields that are like usually, very not high requirements, but low requirements that sometimes shut down innovation in an entire sector and close the possibility for others to think other ways of doing the technology, but blocking some key component. To your point on power infrastructures and the power concentration, many of the patents are concentrated in very few actors. Those actors are like circumventing in many ways the specific health regulations and ethical regulations that usually scientists in the lab of a university have. And what is your opinion on that, on both concentration of patents, how trade secrets block our ability to really scrutinize what's going on, and in general, these blocks that impede a more natural openness that these technologies should have, because of the as all you all shared, of the very intimate nature of the data they're like dealing with.
Yeah, so I mean, this is good. I mean, patents is a great example in terms of, like these power infrastructures, right? Where, as you mentioned, only some benefit and the rest, even if we as a society contributed to generate the basis of knowledge that led to the patent, we are not benefited, right? So there's a lot of studies that, point out that even though many, especially the younger generation, are not even concerned about privacy because they gave up on, like, they can do anything to protect their privacy, which I think is already quite something for us to think about. People say, like, I am okay with sharing my data. I'm okay with my data to be shared openly, but I would also like to then, at least not be able to benefit from this, from me participating into this, data commons approach. So I think we need to do better. That would entail, how do we think of structures that allow companies to have incentives to innovate, but at the same time, they don't limit that the benefits are shared more broadly than we have done in the past, right? And I think this is why having these conversations is really important, because we need people from different backgrounds, different disciplines, different angles to be able to, also share their views and perspectives on this. I think, I understand my colleagues that are lawyers in these realms, but I think the focus on just protecting those with power is something that we need to push back as a society, because otherwise we, I think I mentioned earlier, we only have to get good decisions, and we just need kind of accept those. So yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a clear answer to that, but that's kind of my view on it.
Thank you so much. Would you like Iness or Professor Reinhold share some views about it, or any last thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I'll just like say like one thing. I think it's like when it comes to like the commons, like in general, whether it's like the brain or it's not the, or like data is not a presupposition for, at least that is my opinion, is not like a presupposition, is like an assumption for innovation. We can design systems differently, that they are innovative, that they are essentials, that we can use for our daily life, but to communicate, but without that amount of data that is centralized in one entity. But to do that, it's like much more complex, and I do think we need to have very interdisciplinary communities that they are working together, which is a very complex and hard task, but I think there is a lot of brilliant people out there, whether legally and social science and technically, that can we still build the same system that like the other giant Silicon Valleys are building, but without that centralized control and power over our data.
I can share my last thought, which is if you think about about the internet, you know, TCP, so no one owns the TCP standard, or no one owns email. So if we can find a solution for neurotechnology where this lower layer remains open, then we can still have companies who can flourish, create a lot of product but still keep some level at least of understanding and of what's going on, or a level of control at the end. Because companies have to earn money, that's what they are here for, but they don't need to. So there's a limit to how much maybe companies need to earn, but of course a windfall is always nice. But I think maybe we can use examples of the past. If we find the same, like again for TCP or in signal processing for Fourier transform, if someone would have patented it, you know, the world would be completely different now. Yeah, so just as a thought. But again, for me, it goes back to educating people, because our economic system, as an engineer, in our economic system is built on exponential growth, which can never be stable. So it's basically a quite difficult model to use or to operate in. It cannot work. And we see it. Does it not really properly working? So again, educating people, but keeping some of the core concepts open. I think this would definitely be a first step moving forward.
Well, with that, I think we finalize the panel. I want to thank you. I keep very important lessons that will inform our work going forward from this panel. And especially this of challenging the power infrastructures that we have and looking at the solutions of the past on the standards and the big achievements that we did through participation and combining different sectors, as Iness said, with technical understanding, popular technical understanding how technology works and how it can impact our lives. And we hope that we can deliver together some better future in this area of technology that is very important for many people and potentially harmful for many if we got it wrong. We are going to, and it's okay, we understand this summer, many of you are on vacations and other engagements, so all my appreciation and gratitude for taking the time in the middle of summer or in the middle of the night or very early or in the middle of family appointments to come to us. I hope that it will be one of many interactions that we have with you. And we are going to stop for until the hour, like, depending on your time zone. We will reconvene at 5 p.m. CET. And then we will have two keynote interventions by Professor Christoph Bubelitz and by Dr. Susie Alegre, who are going to have a more broader conversation on the ideas and philosophy on the right of our brainwaves and what is at stake and what's coming next. Thank you, and we will see you in short time, in 15 minutes, around 15 minutes. Have a great day for those leaving. Yes. Bye.